Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be talking about Soar, that's S-O-A-R, Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response, with our resident expert, George Carter, Director of Automation Delivery. George, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine, Chris, and thank you for having me.
And as always, we have on Dave Mahoney. Dave, how's it going?
It's going pretty decent, Chris, although I'm a little offended that I didn't also get the resident expert title.
We can only have one.
Oh, okay. There's a seat requirement. My bad. Okay. Licensing goes up if we have more than one. Is that what it is?
Would you accept expert in waiting?
Oh, man. All right. I see how this podcast is going to go today.
So, yeah, we're talking about something that is kind of different. It's kind of advanced in a lot of ways that people might not have thought of before. So the acronym is SOAR, S-O-A-R. And I kind of want to start with just going through each individual section, break them down in turn, and then we can talk at the end about how they all end up being a worthwhile and valuable product. So SOAR stands for Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response. So how would you describe security orchestration?
All right. So when we think about orchestration, we really want to think about all the elements within a customer's ecosystem that are security related. Most environments don't have just a single firewall. They don't have just a single intrusion detection system. They have myriad pieces that basically make up their security apparatus. And typically what a client has to do is they have to interface with each one of those, pull logs from here, look at certain patterns from there, and then based off of all those different endpoints, then try to make a judgment call as to what's taking place in the environment. What kind of threat are they facing? Well, the orchestration piece really takes care of that, because what we're talking about doing is we're talking about basically automatically pulling data from each of those endpoints. And then we get into another phase of painting a picture. And then once we have a picture, we can respond intelligibly, if you will, to that particular pattern, to that event. So that's a very high level from the orchestration piece, but I'll let Dave go into more detail.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what we need to expect from the technology for security orchestration. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that the one piece that is missing in your description that I think Gartner did a pretty good job of calling out in some of their 2019 market reports is that in order to embrace security orchestration and automation and response, in order to embrace SOAR, security orchestration needs to be your first step, but that goes beyond tooling and getting the data from the various and disparate systems that you might have into a single location and then correlating them into some kind of actionable intelligence. There's a step before that, and that is incident response, right? Your company has to have processes in place to be able to deal with security-related incidents, and there has to be a flow of what constitutes an incident and why, and then what criticality it's going to be set at, and what people then need to do based on that criticality. And that's a process. That has absolutely nothing to do with tools and technology. That's understanding risk and understanding data and understanding data classification and what's in system classification and what's important, and then building the tools and technology around it to collect the pertinent telemetry that George is talking about, to then be able to use that for orchestration in a programmatic fashion. So I think there's two components. There's the policy and the governance, and then the compliance requirements, right? And then there's the security orchestration that goes in hand with the tooling and the automation, the eventual automation that can be garnered from gathering that telemetry in a system or a variety of systems.
So what it sounds like is you're describing a philosophy more than just a tool, more than just something you buy. It's a security posture, if you will, to understand your entire footprint and build processes around protecting your entire footprint.
You're going to do it right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a purist when it comes to things like this, right? So it's no different than It's no different than SASE, right? Secure Access Service Edge, or CASB, even Cloud Access Security Broker, right? Or Zero Trust Networking. It's all the same, right? These are combinations of things that you put together, right? They can be all from one product, potentially. Some of these vendors are doing very good at covering the whole gambit. But these concepts, that's exactly what these are. These terms are concepts of how to use these things in an architectural pattern that provides an outcome. And SOAR is no different. We are putting things together based on risk to a business. Everything has to start there. Otherwise, security has no purpose. A person, a business, and the associated data, right? That's what it all begins from. The procedures that need to be put in place to guard against those risks that are pertinent to those assets, and then orchestrating around it. But orchestration doesn't mean technology. Orchestration means a harmonious process of things, or, a group of things all happening together in a way that's logical to achieve an outcome. So I think it is a philosophy, and the tools and the technology that go underneath of it are important, but circumstantial.
So I think that makes sense, and I think a lot of people will understand that. The way that I see this is that these all build on each other, right? So you start with the security orchestration. That's step one, and understanding your entire environment and how to protect it. Next up is automation. So what are some things that you and George think go into security automation after we started with a baseline of security orchestration?
If we have good security orchestration and we understand the outcomes that we need, because the policy and the governance and the processes and the compliance, all of those things have already been laid out for us. Well, now we know how to use that telemetry to make more advanced decisions. And I think that's what the automation can really do, at least in the first step. And then there's the second step, which is actually potentially taking some kind of programmatic action without human intervention necessarily. In me anyway, in its most simplistic form, that's why the automation is important for this topic. George, you got to have something else, because I took the easy one.
No, and that's totally accurate. When I think about this particular layer, right? So the automation layer, it's really about actions. All right. So we can only imagine that whenever you have your orchestration layer functioning, it is gathering a lot of data, a lot of information. And based off of this information, now you need to do something with it, especially when based off those policies that Dave was mentioning earlier, especially when those policies indicate that there is an actionable event. There's something that we need to do to mitigate a particular risk to the environment. That's where the automation comes in, because anything that an analyst, anything that a security professional would typically do at this point based off of those patterns, we want to be able to automate that through some sort of module. And there's lots of different ways, but we would automate that particular process. And then we can kind of get more into taking action and executing against that. Furthermore, even in this area here, this is a beautiful use case, for AI ML, to where based off of the results of the orchestration engine firing, it produces these patterns. And we know ML is beautiful in this area, because ML, you can basically have it to be able to identify certain patterns, and then based off of these patterns, execute certain actions. And it just further reduces the workload for the security professional as well as the analyst.
I'm so glad that you brought up the AI and ML. I mean, this concept of using a computer and language processing capabilities to draw conclusions from very large data sets, right, that can sometimes be somewhat unstructured. Am I right? Not everything in ML has a structured data set behind it. Is that right, George?
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
All right. That's why this AI and ML capability is so important in the security space, right? Being able to absorb these massive data sets from all of this telemetry. And for those of you that don't know, right, telemetry, the stuff that's being collected by my monitoring tools, the data and metadata that's being gathered about communication flows in my switches and my firewalls and my network interface cards, right? All of that adds to telemetry. Even CMDB data can be considered telemetry. But when you're able to absorb all that information and then you start layering in things like threat intelligence, hey, if this pattern of stuff occurs, this is an indicator of potential threat. And we're doing that now because of data information sharing and all these, fantastic threat intelligence agencies and companies. These threat intelligence feeds are now more powerful than ever. It used to be that they were just spreadsheets of stuff from GitHub that was like, these things are threats, these are new signatures, and nothing was really live in real time. But now with, security as a service platforms, taking all that data and that telemetry that's being absorbed by those systems, feeding it into a single place, and then letting, your processing power and the use case of machine learning spit out actionable intelligence. That's just so powerful. If we can use machine learning for all this stuff like social marketing, we should definitely be using it for security. And I'm really glad that it's here to stay and that people are embracing this, and we're getting away from all of this, plain signature based stuff, and we're getting into behavioral analytics and, like I said, incorporating threat intelligence and then overlaying that with my live data. It's just amazing what we can do.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to recognize, number one, the amount of telemetry, the amount of data is, for any organization, massive. For an individual human being to expect to be able to parse it is not realistic, especially if you have a business that is internet facing. And that's really where, using machine learning, using artificial intelligence brings the power of computing to bear, and to be able to create a security posture for a company that they might not be able to do as individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the things that came out of our modern network security series, right, was we've got to be able to have tools that are collecting information in and out of the network, right? What's leaving? Why is it leaving? Who's sending it? DNS security to know where our traffic's being routed to. Internally, facing, we got DMZs, we got firewalls, we got VPNs, we've got identities, we've got multi-factor. So there's, like you said, and there's all this, monitoring of up, down, and monitoring of URLs. So all this telemetry. And you're still going to pay a guy to go review a firewall log every day? I hate to tell you, but that firewall log isn't going to tell you if you're having an application attack. A lot of these attacks are now application facing. They're DNS type attacks. They're using credentials that are allowed to make connections and get through the firewall. So firewall security isn't where it's at anymore. So we've got to go to a whole new deeper level where there's way more communication and way more traffic into the app stack. And you're going to expect a person to do that? No way.
Yeah, I totally agree, Dave. So having an individual, sift through all that data, number one, it's not practical. And then number two, by the time they found an anomaly or even a pattern, it would be so late that really the system would already be compromised. So it's about empowering and really turbocharging, if you want to call it that, this particular layer, or its automation layer, to be able to sift through all this data and then make logical, intelligent inferences as to what's going on and what the proper response should actually be.
That's absolutely right. And by the way, since you said the word turbocharge, I think this is the perfect time for a turbocharge plug. If you guys want to get started in understanding what security orchestration even means to you as a company, Anexinet does NIST cybersecurity framework gap assessments, and we can get you started on the most difficult step, which is the security orchestration, in case anybody was curious.
Well done. Well done indeed. So that does also bring us to the last letter in our SOAR acronym, which is response. And this might be one where people probably are a little less comfortable, because what we're asking the system to do is to make changes, right? Whether that's to traffic patterns or to user accounts or to access from one device to another. When we talk about automation in the sense that it's actually making changes on your network before consulting with you, people might get a little bit uncomfortable, but it's kind of a necessity considering the speed that attacks can come in. How do you find those conversations with customers? What level of comfort is there? How do you explain it that people can be comfortable with AI and machine learning making decisions on your behalf?
I totally understand that. It does take a measure of comfort in order to allow, this automation and this response, the execution of these playbooks, to allow them to fire without human oversight or intervention. But the point is that we want to understand that all of this is adjustable. All right. the SOAR process can be adjusted to meet the comfort level of the client, especially at the early stages. So perhaps the response itself and the execution of those playbooks isn't to fully execute, a shutdown of a port or to close down a particular firewall, something along those lines. It doesn't have to be that aggressive. It could be something more along the lines of informational first. All right. So I see this pattern. This is what I would typically do. I'm going to notify the key players and then wait for that response to go forward. Or it can even be an amalgamation of a response to where we know anytime we see this pattern, we're going to execute this no matter what. But then before I take further action, notify the key stakeholders before the automation goes forward. So this particular piece of the process is completely adjustable, and it can be adjusted to meet the comfort level of the client.
I think that you're never going to be able to do response if you haven't already done the first two steps. If you haven't gone through the security orchestration and you understand what your physical processes are for incident response and incident remediation, and then you can move into that, if you know what they are and you can map them out and you know what data you need to make a decision, well, then you can automate it. Well, if you can automate it, then getting to the automated response is really just the next evolution. But you can't take that evolutionary step unless you're going to be willing to turn over the keys to the software to a certain extent. But it becomes about site availability or system availability at that point, right? Do we have enough redundancy to be able to take certain steps in our incident response? For example, shutting down a port. Well, yeah, sure. We've got another port. Well, can you live on 50% of your port count? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, right? And that goes into, well, how important is this really to our business? Is it important enough that if we had an incident, we'd need to turn that port off? Well, yeah, because the threats are X, Y, and Z. You have to be, in order to get comfortable, you have to be able to think through the decision-making process. And if you're always going to rely on people to make those decisions because they're too complex to automate, well, then maybe you need to seek an architecture that's more resilient or more defined or more repeatable with better high availability resources so that you can get to that next evolution. I mean, I don't want to think that just because you can do security or orchestration and just because you can do automation, you can automatically do response. I don't think that those things are mutually inclusive. I think that the goal is to define good security orchestration, build good automation to mature that process and use the tools and technology and telemetry to your advantage, especially with the massive data sets and all these other things and the speed of attacks and all these other things that we talked about, limiting dwell time, et cetera. But to get to response is really it's going to be a very personal decision, I guess, is the best way to define it. I don't know. But you have to be able to be willing to turn over those keys. But it's only going to work in places where you have a very repeatable process and you can make the machine understand the criteria when to make a decision and when not to make a decision. And then now whether or not you want to let it do that on its own. Are you comfortable with it? Is it something that you can test and repeat and it's not going to fail? I think that the response is the next evolution, but I don't think that just because you do the first two, you're not automatically going to be able to get to response every time.
No, that's spot on, Dave. And I want to key in on something that Dave just mentioned. He said a repeatable process. And that's really what this is. All right. So it's not like the AI ML engine is going to define its own code. We're just not at the Skynet level yet. It's not going to happen. But we're talking about those low level processes, right? The playbooks that are executing are ones that a typical administrator would execute in order to mitigate this particular problem. And these are repeatable, predictable outcomes. That's really what you want to turn over in the response section of SOAR, not necessarily a very high level response. That's not it. It's always those low level responses. And once again, it's not going to be a cure all for the environment. But what its main objective is to alleviate that burden, all right, the analysis burden, the response burden for a large ecosystem.
I mean, think about the time. Yeah. I mean, just even the timeliness factor, right? If we took a practical example, you could use SOAR to do something like this. A user clicks on a link in an email and it happens to be a phishing link, right? It got scanned. It got sent to their junk mail just like it was supposed to based on the exchange policy. They should have known better, right? But maybe they did it accidentally or I don't know, whatever reason they click on it. You could have the system, plural systems, notify you that, hey, somebody is trying to make an outbound request to a DNS entry that we know is malicious. So we're going to flag it. And then not only are we going to flag it, we're going to stop that from happening. We're going to say, don't do it, right? You have normal DNS security tools that will do this today. Nope. We're going to content filter that and block it. Well, now I want to send an incident to my security team because I just want them to know that this happened. And then I automatically want that person to get enrolled in security awareness training that's going to get sent to them right now just because they clicked on that link. So now it's timely. They clicked on a bad link, they got a notification, and then they immediately got enrolled in security awareness training for the following day or whatever. And I'm going to send an email to their manager to make sure that he reiterates how important it is that, good cyber hygiene and email security principles. That kind of timely response, even at that level, is so dramatic to how it impacts your security culture in your organization. It would do us so much good. So it doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be something that simple that just makes a huge impact to your organization and shows the dedication that you bring as a governance and a policy machine that you expect your users to follow.
Very nice. That's an awesome example, Dave.
And that kind of a response is not destructive, right? It's not blocking anybody's traffic. It's not cutting off anybody's access.
You're just promoting good hygiene.
Right. In a lot of cases, that is probably another way to make people comfortable with the idea of automation is, in general, start with monitoring and alerting. Let everybody get used to the fact that the system is looking at all of this data, all of this telemetry, and is responding, to your point, Dave, instantly. And then 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, maybe people will be more and more comfortable letting the response happen on its own without having somebody else be involved.
Yeah. Well, there's that. And then there's the flip side of that coin. How much less likely do you think that user is going to be to use their work device or their work email for personal stuff that promotes higher levels of risk to the organization if that happens within that immediate period of time, within a few seconds? I bet you that risk goes way down.
I mean, I'm going to use Etsy from whatever device I want to, and I'm frankly a little upset that you continue to give me grief about it.
Leave it to Chris to be the biggest offender on the call.
That's it.
No, but I mean, seriously though, if I had something like that, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, because I have a security background, I do my darndest to separate, personal from business and try to keep my business machine for business. And, if God were to get a hold of my laptop, would I be afraid if he, searched my web history, right? Stuff like that. But there's a lot of people out there that don't. They have one computer, they have one laptop, and they use it for everything because it's just there and in front of them. And as long as they're not infringing on company time or doing something that they deem to be dangerous or illegal or harmful, they'll do it, right? Like, how many of us go to, Amazon or whatever? I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with those actions. I'm saying that they promote risk to an organization that we have to be aware of because of the ubiquity of the internet and internet communications, right? You use whatever device you're on to just get out to the web. I bet you if we had a process like I just described through Soar, where that user is getting enrolled in security awareness training, and being told, hey, we're not going to let you go to this link, all within seconds, and their manager gets an email that it happened, right? You're not firing that person. You're educating them. You're doing your best to bring them up, and you're setting expectations. But I bet you they'll think about it twice the next time, and they'll be very much less likely to go to Facebook or go to LinkedIn or whatever and start, pulling down files and everything else.
Yeah. I mean, it would certainly make that employee more safety conscious, safety aware. And to your point, Chris, absolutely. Start small. Start small and build that confidence up. And then as you as an organization, becomes more comfortable and sees the value that SOAR can bring, then by all means, at that point, then start to scale up. You can scale up in the number of responses. You can scale up in the complexity of the responses until you can, gain that comfort level that they're looking for.
So let's talk about these other things that Gartner says you need to have, right? It's really around vulnerability management, incident response, and then automation, right? Those are the three kind of technical buckets or functions that they put in with SOAR. Does anybody have a different version they want to quote from?
Nope, that's the one I have.
I think it's funny that vulnerability management is in the list right? We talk about security, when we talk about SOAR, right? The security orchestration, automation, and response. Vulnerability management is the first category that gets listed. I always thought that vulnerability management was everywhere at this point. It was pervasive and ubiquitous. Do you guys think that I'm wrong?
I could certainly see that. I guess my interpretation was a little different. I took that to kind of lean more towards vulnerability scanners. All right. So being able to interface and extract telemetry data from those scanners. So more or less trying to get data from a pre-existing system versus that actually making up the orchestration layer.
Oh yeah, I don't think that that be the orchestration layer. I agree with you there. I think that's just one component, right? The threat intelligence, vulnerability management, right? If I have threats that are out there that are targeting these things, and I have these vulnerabilities, and I marry them up, well, that creates a whole bunch of stuff that I need to go look at.
Correct.
It's a way to start defining good telemetry that doesn't lead to false positives, I guess is a way to phrase that, right? That are live in an incident. They're pertinent to you. I guess that's why they're there.
Yeah, and I think there's probably an aspect of this that is also about looking for unusual technology that might end up becoming a vulnerability. So if you have a web app and you start to notice SQL injection attacks or something like that, that's not a vulnerability in the sense that you didn't update your Windows installation. It's something that you're noticing malicious traffic that could potentially become a problem. And if we take the long enough view, that is valuable too, right? Because one of the biggest things we can recognize, especially when it comes to automated attacks, is very specific, targeted, unusual traffic. And that in and of itself can be a vulnerability if you don't have the correct sanitization on your SQL queries, for example.
Well, Chris was the first one to say SQL queries. We're now officially nerds.
Well, at least I didn't say SQL.
What? You mean we're not supposed to say SQL? Is that like a thing? Did we cancel SQL?
It's a rule. We can't say SQL.
Oh. Was that like a 2020 cancellation thing, or is this just like a Chris Hayner rule?
It's a Chris Hayner rule, but that means it's a real rule, right? For everybody.
All right. I don't know how you get your head in and out of your door frames in your house. I really don't.
Yeah. I have a lot of French doors.
A lot of French doors. There's a whole nother podcast just on why Chris has French doors and what that means. So what do we think about, the adoption of SOAR? Do you think SOAR is a mid-market thing? Is it an enterprise thing? Should we all be looking to do SOAR? Should we, as a systems integrator and a services provider, is this something that we should be trying to bring into the lower tiers of business to make it available to everyone?
I certainly see SOAR playing more in the enterprise space, but it's something that should be evangelized, if you will, down to the mid-sector too as well, because there's benefits there. If we think about relieving all that workload off a security professional so that they can really focus on more pertinent information, right? And that's really where the value is at. It's automating these responses, making a business more intelligent. And certainly that's very valuable up at the enterprise level. But as I mentioned, the mid-sized organizations too as well can greatly benefit from SOAR.
So, George, I got a question.
Yeah.
Is this something that we could theoretically build? For example, like let's say that I have an organization that's, moderately small. I've got a few people, let's say 5 to 10, right? We primarily use Office 365. So I've got, some Azure AD, I've got Exchange, probably have, OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams. And so there's a lot of access logs and, and access control and role-based access, right? But it's all really kind of up in Office 365. And maybe I have a couple other cloud apps, right? But I really don't have like a company network or a secure perimeter, right? It's all cloud-based and some endpoints. Mm-hmm. Do you think that we could actually grab those logs and build the AI and ML using a lot of the security intelligence and threat intelligence that already comes with these Microsoft platforms? Do you think that we could build an automation and orchestration platform, an orchestration, automation, and response platform custom, build our own middleware and workflow engine and based on the information that we could collect? Is that doable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about basically the first step of this, reaching out and then, just collecting that data. All right. You can be as broad with that. You can be as intensive with that, as your footprint will allow. But when you think about the actual response, all right, so the automation phase of this, those playbooks can be created really to be as broad as you would like them to be. It's very customizable. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all. So really it depends on what the organization is actually looking for, what kind of existing policies they already have in this space. And certainly those policies can be adjusted, the playbooks can be adjusted, and the response, how it executes, can also be adjusted.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think this is something that would be, if you were in that position, do you think that investing in that kind of automation would be financially prudent? Do you think that it would be doable, or do you think you'd be better off trying to find a tool that could do it or build it into something that exists on the market today, some sort of COTS?
When you think about your ROI for this, it's going to be almost instantaneous, right? Because if you don't have a SOAR process in place, think about what you need to do in order to respond to a security event. Number one, you have to have individuals, a number of individuals. Some organizations have armies that are basically pulling those logs, pulling all that telemetry data, and then someone needs to sit down and actually sift through it. They need to make a judgment call on what they're seeing, any kind of patterns, anomalies that they're experiencing, and then based off of what they're seeing, now take the time to hammer out a response to mitigate that particular threat. All of that is manually intensive, and it's time consuming. That in itself, time, resources, are a significant resource hog, right? So when you think about your return on investment, eliminating those two pieces right there, time and the number of individuals that are having to work on this mundane task, if you eliminate those two all by itself, you've already paid for SOAR.
So what I took away is, yes, have Anexinet come and build you an automation and response platform if you don't want to invest in a bunch of expensive security tools. That's what I took away.
That's the message.
All right. Done.
As a solid summary.
Yeah. It's another one of those turbocharge ads right there.
At some point, can we get to supercharging? Because turbochargers are overrated. There, I said it.
Oh, my word. One of these days, there will be something that you will not have an opinion about, and I'll be there to see it, and I'm going to cry because it's going to be a blessed day.
I want to give you guys the opportunity to have some final thoughts. The way that I see it, SOAR is a process. It's a philosophy. It's a path to getting to the most secure and the most protected environment that you possibly can. And, to the point that we were making before, it doesn't really matter how big your organization is. Thinking about things this way, thinking about them from an orchestration level, programmatically across your entire platform, is really, really valuable. Setting up the very basics with just monitoring and reporting to get started, to get comfortable, to get your foot in the door. And then as your automated environment gets more robust, that you get more comfortable with it, you can start to allow it to do more and more things. And the more and more things that it can do, the more secure you're going to be, and the more quickly you'll be able to respond to a security incident.
Yeah. So the goal is, somebody told me this story, so this isn't my story, but it was either for the Army or the Navy, and they were in, one of the cyber intelligence headquarters for one of these armed divisions of the military. And a security event occurred, right? There was something bad was coming in over the network, and they saw it. And this officer who was in the duty shift officer or whatever in charge at the time saw it happen, and rather than doing anything on a keyboard at all, she actually got up and walked over to the data center and grabbed a switch cable or a firewall or cable out of a firewall. I don't remember what the device was, and pulled it out and disconnected it. The story was that it all turned out okay. She didn't cause a major outage because everything finally reconverged. So I'm pretty sure it was a router of some kind. That is a pretty well-defined response to an incident. And she didn't get fired or lose her job, and everybody apparently was under the impression that she did the right thing. I don't know that many of us could say that today, that we have an incident response process that would allow us to walk in and pull a cable out of a port, out of a device, that would be an acceptable solution to a security incident. But I think that's the goal. And if you can get to that level of maturity and that level of incident response, then Soar should be a cakewalk, and it should be something that let's save that person from having to take that action, and let's just shut down the port programmatically, right? And then let the chips fall where they may. That's the philosophy. But I think people are skipping the philosophy, and they're looking to Soar and other types of technology to solve the problem. But you can't do that. You've got to use human ingenuity and risk assessment for the business that's appropriate and right sized to embrace the philosophy and then go build Soar around it.
I just want to key in on something that Dave mentioned there. So when you talk about, that fine example that he gave, where the soldier there had to go to the data center and then pull the port out, it just made me reflect on how many administrators have a response. All right. They know how to respond to a certain number of events. If not, they would not be in that role. But how many of those engineers share that data? That's also just a beautiful benefit to Soar, because, I may basically know how to deal with 3 or 4 different anomalies. I know what the patterns look like. And I know exactly what my response is going to be. My colleague may have the exact same thing, but on different areas. But whenever you get to the point where you have your policies and you have the automation in place with the playbooks, we see now those playbooks are a storehouse of that collective data, those collective responses. It's human intelligence in writing that can be shared by the whole team, so that it's not just up to one individual who knows how to respond to this. The system now knows exactly how to respond to this particular event. And once again, that is a great value to any organization, regardless of its size.
Yeah, you're not beholden to tribal knowledge anymore, or Bobby's out on vacation, so this got worse than it needed to be, or oh yeah, we had a guy that knew how to fix everything and now he's gone and now we're in major trouble, right? Your maturity is going to do a lot for you outside of just give you better security. It's going to optimize things across your business in ways that you never even anticipated.
Well, I think we solved Soar. We can leave it there. George, Dave, thank you both for your time.
Yep, thank you for having us.
Thanks, Chris. George, always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Same here, Dave.
Take care, folks.